following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zig Zag Man, in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco and across the moat from Oakland. I'm at the 420 studio down by the lagoon. If you know Alameda, everything is down by the lagoon, and Archie Bunker wouldn't have been able to say it better even if he were alive. I am a lucky guy. I get to talk to some of the most fascinating, interesting people on the planet, and today is no exception. Returning to the airwaves for like 7, 8, 9 times, you must be an interesting guy, Gabriel Schechter. How are you, Gabriel?
I'm fine, Ralph, and I'm apparently interesting, at least by your standards. So let's see if we can
If you have a heart, you have empathy, you love baseball, helps. You have a passion, whatever your passion is, it would be great. But that it is baseball, and that you're like myself, grew up on the East Coast, live on the West Coast. There's a certain bond that folks that leave the East Coast for the West Coast share. I don't think we've talked about that, but
that's very true.
It's almost like being a pioneer. Am I correct?
I think absolutely, part pioneer and part refugee.
Yes, or escape.
I like to tell people I was raised in New Jersey and grew up when I left.
Wow, that's a very, very good line. Says it all, too. I'm still waiting. Next Thursday, I start my grow-up lesson. So until then,
oh, really?
The same, not really. I have a certain amount of arrested development, and we could talk about that on a psychologist's couch. Right now,
sure.
Let's talk some of your blog stories. I'm on Facebook, you're on Facebook, and you posted a blog story. The theme was Don Larson. So important. The theme wasn't, but the reference was Don Larson. And
Don Larson was the icing on the cake on that story, I think.
I know, but that it reminded me of being 10, and Don Larson pitches a perfect game in the World Series. I come home from school, it's about the 8th inning, and my mother is watching baseball. And I never put those two together. My mother being a fan, I was just starting to be an avid baseball fan, and she told me a story as we were watching the completion of that game, that she had attended the Lou Gehrig speech, the luckiest man in the world. She was 19, living upstate New York, comes into the city, gets some ducats, as they used to call them, and gets to see that game. And I had no idea. She talked about that with.
Wow.
I mean, opened up that day that when Lawson was pitching. I remember Yogi on their black and white TV jumping into Lawson.
Mm-hmm.
So I perked up and couldn't help but think, next time you're on, I'd love to have. Next time I get Gabriel, I'd love to have him tell that story, if you would.
I'll be happy to. I was raised in New Jersey, in Bergen County, in the northeast corner, right across George Washington Bridge. My parents were in the original wave of inhabitants of Levittown on Long Island in the late 40s. And when I was a year old, they moved all the way across the Geowash Burr to New Jersey, about 8 miles past. And I grew up in the towns of New Milford and Oradell. And my parents had been interested in theater before I came along. My father, in fact, moved to New York City in 1930 to become a songwriter. And he tried his damnedest, but that was the heyday of all the big names. And although there was plenty of music being produced, he didn't make it. And he and my mother wrote music. He wrote the tunes, she wrote the lyrics. They were huge fans of Cole Porter and Irving Berlin in particular, and later Frank Lesser, who wrote Guys and Dolls, was a huge favorite. And my mother's lyrics in particular are quite clever and clearly inspired by Cole Porter. I posted the lyrics to one song with the blog, and I think they're terrific. Anyway, they had written the score for a musical.
Stubby K, Guys and Dolls, my favorite Broadway show.
Mine too.
Poignant. I remember Frank Sinatra in the movie. I remember Alan.
Well, Ralph, we used to listen to the original cast album of the Broadway show with Robert Alda. Alan Alda's father as Sky Masterson, and I'm spacing out the guy who played Nathan, Sam Levine, Broadway veteran, as Nathan Detroit.
Good old reliable.
So, in fact, my parents...
Nathan Detroit.
Yeah. My parents saw Guys and Dolls on Broadway 3 nights before I was born, so I have the score and Damon Runyon in my DNA almost. So they had written the score for a show that was produced in Levittown before they moved, and they immediately got involved in a theater group whose theater was in Oradell. New Milford and Oradell were next door. And it was called the Bergen County Players. It had been founded in the 1930s, and it is still going. They're about 90 years now, and they produce one play a month for 8 or 9 months, off during the summer. And classic theater, their tendency has been to produce Broadway shows a year or two after they open on Broadway. And my mother was an actress. My father did lights and sound, and they wrote the score to an original musical produced at the Bergen County Players in 1953 called Stake Your Claim, a Western musical. And I have the original cast album. I have a lot of the sheet music. I have the program notes, and I know where all the songs fit in. And Linda and I used to listen to that cast album many times. It's great stuff. Now, here's my
for one reason or another, they just didn't sell it, or just didn't get to Broadway.
No, it's just a local production.
Okay.
That's all. My mother, I didn't mention this in the blog, but later in the 50s, my mother produced and directed 2 shows for the Jewish Community Center in New Milford. She did Call Me Madam and Pal Joey. Produced, directed, choreographed.
Frank Sinatra movie later on.
Pal Joey, yeah. Another one, right. So that's all the background to my involvement in the theater. The theater was a huge social hub for us. And one of the things I remember, and this is going to come in another story I'm going to tell. that's where I got to know all the silent movie stars. Once a month, there was a night of silent movies. One of the members, worked at, I think, NBC and had access to their film archive. And once a month he would bring Chaplin, Keaton, Harold Lloyd, Harry Langdon, Keystone Cops. He'd bring a feature and some two-reelers, one-reelers. And that's how I got to know Chaplin and Keaton, especially when I was, 10, 11 years old. It was terrific. So here's my acting story. And when I was about 5 years old, I made my one appearance on the stage in the 7-Year Itch. This was a few years after it had been on Broadway and a year or so after the film, which is famous as the movie in which Marilyn Monroe's white dress gets blown up by the wind on the sidewalk.
Angry.
And that's his claim to fame.
Yeah. That angered Joe DiMaggio, who was a very staid guy.
Yeah, he watched it being filmed, and he was just appalled.
He was appalled, right? That sign of the times.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and I have a pretty strong memory of it. I was in the opening scene only. I played their son, and the film is about a New York average business guy who sends his wife and son off to New England for the summer, and he'll only be able to go on weekends because he has to stay there and work. And so the opening scene is he's about the wife and son leaving, and how upset the son is because Daddy can't come with them. Daddy has to stay in New York City, and poor Daddy. Of course, in the movie, Daddy gets to meet Marilyn Monroe. So it isn't all bad for Daddy, but the son doesn't know that. So I had this opening scene, 4 lines. 2 of them were poor Daddy, and then I would have to go home because it was past my bedtime, and I never saw the play. And that's what I remembered. So a couple of months ago, a newspaper archive that I subscribed to added the Bergen County Record, the paper that I grew up on. And so I immediately searched my parents and myself and found all kinds of great things, found the review of the musical they wrote, found two photos of my mother in productions, great photos, reviews of her, 4 or 5 of her acting performances. The one I got a hoot out of, she played Mrs. Gibbs in Our Town, one of the 2 matriarchs in Our Town. And the reviewer, talking about her and the woman who played Mrs. Webb, the other one, said they weren't entirely convincing as parents because they looked so young. And my mother at the time was 42 and I was 8.
Nice compliment.
So, yeah, absolutely. I've got a photo of her in the blog. And the blog, by the way, if anybody wants to read it, is charlesapril.com. Just go to that and you'll see this blog. So I found all this great stuff about my mother's acting. And then I decided to look up my own performance. And I found 2 references to it. First, I found the review of the production, and second, I found kind of a preview article, publicity thing written by somebody in the theater company. But first, I found the review, and it was a good review. It says, "Players open new season with well-acted laugh hit." And after talking about the 6 actual performers, here is this sentence. Special mention must be made of the outstanding performance of young Gabriel Schechter, who portrays Ricky, the Sherman's son, with brilliance and sincerity. That kind of floored me, because I could understand sincerity, poor daddy, but brilliance? How brilliant could I be in 4 lines when 2 of them were just poor daddy? So I thought, wow, that's pretty nice, but what
get somebody's attention. Accept it.
What exactly were they talking about? So then I looked in or found the preview article. And here is what I wrote, what I read. Others in the cast include Judy Lash, Joan Cole, Doris Wheeler, Ted Lash, with 5.5-year-old Gabriel Schechter threatening to steal every scene in which he appears. Huh? What production are they talking about? I was pretty sure I was only in 4 lines. What do they mean, every scene in which he threatens to steal every scene in which he appears? And, of course, this was written out just after rehearsals, no performances. So was I so hyper that running around the stage I kept intruding on everybody else's scenes? Or were there actually other scenes that this boy was in? And were they perhaps cut because I was overacting too much, and so that they reduced me to this one little scene at the start? So I had to find out. Just what was going on there. Was this hype? And as I noted, I'm sure whoever wrote that from the players must have thought, oh, Harold and Tanya, my parents, they'll get a big kick out of seeing this. And I'm sure they did, but not as big a kick as I got out of it 62 years later. So it took me a couple of months to finally track down a copy of the play. That is the original, text that I would have been working for in this company. And I found quickly enough that Ricky is only in that one scene at the start. My memory trumped the company's hype. Right. If I was stealing scenes, it was somebody else's scenes in rehearsal, or they just wanted me to sound like some hot shit young kid actor. So,
you know what I'm surprised at? Your parents didn't ever take you into New York City to any of those daytime kid shows. My mother took my brother and I. Maury Amsterdam had a show, and a few other people John Henry Falk had a show just for kids, precocious kids like yourself, and make the rounds. You could have been a child actor.
It's conceivable. It's conceivable. I mean, we attended productions. I know they took me. Probably. So, but I took a closer look at the actual scene, and apart from Poor Daddy, which was my last 2 lines, I had 3 sentences and 19 words. Imagine that. Sorry, what about Daddy? What about Daddy? Isn't Daddy coming with us? Daddy'll come up front and, but Mommy, why can't Daddy come up with us now? And then she explains all these awful things he has to do, stay in the city. Poor Daddy. And that's I still couldn't separate brilliance and sincerity. I could see where I might have been brilliantly sincere. I kind of remember that. That's as far as I was willing to go. Now, here's the thing. Here's the part you've been waiting for. So, as you can imagine, it was pretty trippy to read all this stuff. Reviews of what my parents did and this whole hype thing about what I might have done and how good I might have been. And then the final thing, I looked at the page of the newspaper that I was looking at. And the review, I should add that each show had 13 performances, Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, and there was a Sunday matinee on the first weekend. So there had been 4 performances. Monday morning, October 8th, 1956, the review of my performance appeared. And, of course, that was the morning of the day when Don Larson pitched his perfect game. And I happened to know that Don Larson lived somewhere in Bergen County. I'm sure I could find out exactly. I know where I could find out. But I know he was in Bergen County because we have the same physician, Dr. Philip Pollack, who that winter got Larson to sign a postcard photo for me. And my doctor, by the way, sometime in the late 50s, got me a signed ball from a Yankees old-timers game.
Oh, wow.
At the stadium. It's got 26 signatures on it. On the sweet spot is Joe DiMaggio and Al Schacht. How's that for a parlay? But it's got Dizzy Dean, Lefty Gomez, Bill Dickey, lots of the Yankees. So I knew in theory, sorry to interrupt, that Don Larson could have awakened that morning and read the review and thought, look what this 5.5-year-old kid does. You know, maybe I could do something like that. Of course, that's all fiction. It would make a nice short story, and maybe it will someday. But Don Larson stayed in Manhattan in a hotel room during the series and went out drinking the night before, so he didn't see me perform. He probably didn't see that review. Still, the timing of it, the karmic timing of it, is terrific, I think.
Absolutely.
As one of my friends responded, perhaps there was somebody who saw both performances, and which one of them would have been more impressive? The 5.5-year-old with perfect pitch, or the 30-year-old who pitched perfectly? Beautiful.
You're a wordsmith, Gabriel Schechter. No question about that.
That was what my friend said, that last one. That was a friend of mine.
He's a wordsmith. How about that? You give him credit.
Now, let me tell you about another. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
What other stories do you want to tell?
Well, I've got another little mystery that I was able to clear up. Among other things I inherited from my parents were a number of theater books. And I had read a couple over the years, but there were some that I had literally never looked at. And I read 2 of them last year. And much to my amazement, I opened up the first one. It's a book called Fanfare, Confessions of a Press Agent. Published in the late 50s, the author is Richard Maney, known as Dick Maney, a legendary New York City publicist. Talk about parlays. He was the publicist for Tallulah Bankhead and Billy Rose, the producer. So, very well-known guy. So I wanted to read this book, and I opened it up, and right inside the front cover, he had signed it. And he says, here's how he had signed it. To Scheck, a bastard, with love, Dick Maney. I thought, what the hell? Now, my father's name was Harold Schechter. He was the last of 10 children, and only the last 2 were born in the United States. All of his siblings, born in Romania, had biblical names. He had brothers Noah, Jacob. His father was Moses. His uncle was Solomon Schechter, a famous person in Jewish history. But my father's name was Harold, and he hated it. He tried all his life, I'm told, to get a nickname. Just any kind of a nickname. He just did not like that name. And so here, to Scheck, all right. Maybe A bastard? Well, conceivably, you know. He was lovable, but he...
Just a kidding
Excuse me?
phrase between them, that could have been a kidding phrase, a bastard, you know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. They could have been drinking partners. My father had been around New York City in, trying to get in show business in the 30s. Maybe they were old friends from the 30s. My father was friends with Harold Rosenthal, a sports writer in the city and living in Manhattan, old friends, whatever. Just check, a bastard, with love, Dick Maney. But I also thought about my Uncle Noah. My Uncle Noah, for his whole life, his whole professional life, was the publicity man for the Schubert Theater chain in Cincinnati. And kind of a legendary figure of his own in Cincinnati theater. Excuse me?
Could have been a fellow scribe.
Yeah. And so I thought, well, maybe this was referring to... Could this have been Noah? What was I doing with a book that was inscribed to Noah? Well, I guess I had like 2 or 3 keepsakes that had been handed down, possibly from Noah through my father when Noah died in the late 50s. So it could have been one of those books. So, but it was a mystery without any answer until I opened another one of the books. And this is a biography of the Luntz. People who know theater history know Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontanne went back to the 1920s. Great friends of Noel Coward and sort of the epitome of the stage couple. Very, very famous. Forgotten now. So this one is inscribed to Noah Schechter in memory of happy times, signed by Lunt and Fontanne. Is that beautiful?
Yes.
So that sort of clears up in my mind that the other book was signed for my Uncle Noah as well.
Wow. Nice to have.
But yeah, so I've got theater on both sides.
Mystery solved, and all the things that float around one's head that just out there, I'd love to know, and there's no answers. You took it upon yourself. That stuff's not on the internet. This, when you went to the Bergen County stuff, you wouldn't have been able to get it unless you went there directly, because they, which
right.
shows you as much.
That's one of the great. That's one of the great developments on the internet is archival sources. And but if anyone is wondering, excuse me, newspapers.com is the site that I went to. There are other good ones, Paper of Record, and that just have microfilmed archives, old searchable archives, and they're wonderful and for any kind of family or historical research.
So if you can provide a date and a newspaper, come up with that day's newspaper?
You can do that, or if you search for a person and put in, don't even specify a paper, you can, on this one archive, just specify a time period. You can find everything. Newspapers.com, yeah. Now, I have one more acting story to tell you, Ralph, and you haven't heard this one.
Okay.
So, I did not act anymore. Actually, I did. I was the star of my class play in second grade. I believe because I was the only one capable of memorizing lines, I think. And I auditioned for another role at the Bergen County Players. I was 11 or 12 and didn't get the part. And that was it. In college, I became the drama reviewer for the school paper for about 2 years. And I spent a semester in London my junior year. In 4 months, I saw 68 plays.
Oh, wow.
And in 2 later trips to London in the 70s, I saw another 3 dozen or so. So I saw over 100 plays in London in the 70s. You mind if I drop some names on you of the people I saw perform?
Yes.
You ready for this list? I saw Laurence Olivier in 2 plays. I saw him play Shylock, and I saw him in Long Day's Journey into Night. I saw Alec Guinness, Ralph Richardson, Deborah Carr, Maggie Smith, Robert Morley, Albert Finney, 3 Redgraves, Paul Schofield, Christopher Plummer. The list goes. I saw all the prominent British actors that became famous in their middle age. I saw them when they were starting, like Anthony Hopkins and Helen Mirren and Judi Dench and all those people. Amazing things I saw. But I digress. I have to tell you about my other acting experience. It happened in grad school. I went to the University of Oregon, and it had a good film studies program. And 2 of my friends, Norm and Alice, were studying film, and they wanted to get into the film business. And, in fact, Alice did make a career of it. And they had a little short film they wanted to do, and I starred in it. It was about 15 or 20 minutes long, silent film, and here's what it was. We filmed it mostly in the office building where we worked, and I played a professor who enjoyed playing stupid practical jokes on colleagues. I remember a couple of them throwing water balloons out my office window on the 5th floor and dropping it on colleagues. And my favorite, we put a poster up on an office door of Jean-Luc Godard, the French filmmaker, kind of a profile portrait photo of him. And I walk down the hall, and I stop, and I take out a magic marker, and I very quickly draw on a mustache and beard and glasses and a pipe. And then I knock on the door and run away. And the guy opens the door, and he stands there, like, right next to what I've drawn, and it looks just like him.
Oh, wow.
Beautiful. It was really great. So what they do is I look out the window, and their revenge on me. I look out the window and see them stealing my car. And I wind up chasing them. I'll talk about that in a minute. But we had to do a shot, called an establishing shot, just to show that it was my car. So all I had to do was film me pulling into a parking space and getting out of the car. Fine. I'm not sure why we had to use Norm's car, but we did, and it was a stick shift, and I had never driven a stick shift. So they showed me just enough so I could do what I needed to do, like drive 15 feet, turn into the space, park in the space, and get out. And so that's what I did. Turned, stopped, got out. I had forgotten to put the car in park, however. And so as I got out, it rolled away. That was my... So we had to do another take. I know. The other take was, I think, Norm parking the car and then, switching to another little shot of me getting out of it. Beautiful. So here's what happened. My favorite part of the movie is I see them steal the car. I race downstairs, race out of the building, and and I did a Buster Keaton move. And I might add, I regards for you from Gary Brown, a good friend of mine. And I told Gary about this the other day, and I got to the part about the bicycle, and he said, "Did you have a pork pie hat on like Buster Keaton?" And I almost killed him, cracking him up by telling him, "No, but here's what I did. I did the half of the Buster Keaton move from It's a Mad, 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 Mad World." Picture this. It's 4 quick steps to the left, abrupt stop, look around, nothing I can do there, quick 4 steps the other way and stop, look there, and then take like a half a turn and 2 steps and stop, and what do I do? Well, I grab a bicycle, and I start chasing them on the bicycle. And since they want me to follow, they stay just far enough ahead of me that they don't lose me, and I'm bicycling them after them, and they get the shots of this chase. And they pull into a driveway and run into a house, and I pull in right after them and run into the house. And the climax of my comeuppance is as I go through the door, a whole bucket of water is dumped on me. And there's like 30 people standing there laughing at me as I'm soaked in this water. And that's more or less the end. And, looking back, I can see where I was typecast. I can see where Norm and Alice looked around at all their friends and colleagues and thought, whom would we most love to see a bucket of water dumped on? And voila, there I was.
All right. That's a comeuppance indeed. And that's only one take. You can't film that 2 or 3 times.
Oh, no. I remember credit to Linda Noble, whose house it was, and they literally cleared every stick of furniture out of her living room. To set that up and put tarps down and everything else. Yes. And one take indeed.
Yeah. Hey, before your next show, let's talk a little bit about the baseball season coming up. Anything that stands out? You're laughing.
Well, we can never get too far from baseball, can we? I mean, I dragged Don Larson into this.
Yes.
That's not enough. That's not enough, is it, Ralph?
You opened it up. Real quick, give me your impressions of what stands out to you going in. Rule changes, DH, in the prospective DH in the National League. What is it that's in your craw?
Well, I guess we've gotten to the point where it's easier to envision a time when baseball truly will not resemble the game we know. All the changes in the past 100 years, especially in the past 50, they've sort of been variations on a theme, but we can see that theme and those parameters getting much, much different. I noticed John Thorne, official historian of baseball, the other day, more or less advocating moving the pitching distance back to 62 feet. There's talk of tinkering with base distances. It's unsettling to those of us who have this lifelong image of the game, but I know enough to know that every generation has a different perspective and a different foundation of what baseball is supposed to be. So I can see where, in 50 years when the team on Mars builds for offense because the atmosphere is thinner or whatever, that it might well be a very different game. It might come to 2-platoon baseball. I can honestly see where MLB and the Players Union would both welcome a system where they might have, 30, 35-man roster approaching what, a football team might have. So you would assemble, your mission as a GM would be to assemble the 9 best hitters and the 9 best fielders and the 18 best pitchers, because each of those would have a more vital importance, because they would get to do their specialty all the time.
Yeah, and we will no longer see a starting pitcher during 6 innings. It'll just be coming in to face this guy.
Oh, yeah.
Situation, get a ground ball, you need a strikeout, that type of thing.
We might well come to open substitution. Pitchers coming in twice in the same game, the same way the DH is a pinch hitter coming into the game 4 times. How about having a designated pitcher just to pitch to the designated hitter? Who knows what screwy things they'll come up with that 50 years from now will seem, it's just like the natural way of things. It's
not natural anymore.
It doesn't seem that way. Baseball talents seem to be getting more and more specialized all the time, or their roles are becoming more specialized, which means their training is becoming more specialized. That's why I'm focusing on this. I can see where that trend, if it's not checked, that is, if the prevailing mentality does not return to training all around players, just train players to do this or that thing well, it could come to that. We could go back to the designated runner. Herb Washington's grandson might find a role if he can run fast enough as a designated pinch runner. Who knows?
If he weren't torn away by basketball or football.
Well, true. So I'm becoming more philosophical about all these changes. I'm trying to teach myself to take them less personally and to realize that just as in every other facet of our lives, in a sense, we are trapped inside the moment of our history. And I'm trying to
go with the flow a little bit.
Excuse me?
We have to learn to go with the flow. When I say we, I'm speaking
collectively. Yeah. I try to see the big picture in the historical sweep and know that we're at a point in baseball and in the real world, we're at a kind of tipping point. But I think it's something that every generation perceives. It's certainly true in baseball, that every generation has solidified as it grows older and resented whatever newfangled changes people are coming up with. That's always happened.
Right.
It's been going on since the 1880s, and all the rules changes in the 1880s. What are they doing to our sacred game? It's been like this for 20 years. Well, now it's been like this for 100 years or whatever, or 50 years.
Well,
and we no longer... Yeah.
We've always had that constant of the pitching mound being X number, if he's 62 and a half or whatever it is, the bases.
Yeah.
We've always been able to keep a rule book, not a rule book, but a record book that's, no matter which generation, you can still find there's a bottom denominator. If we change the distances, that takes away the common denominator. And,
suppose you kept the bases the same and moved the mound back 2 feet. Suppose. I think it might bring a return to dead ball era tactics. Wouldn't it be a lot easier to bunt if the pitcher starts 2 feet further back?
Good point.
Just
very good point.
Just for one thing, baseball has always tended to flex back toward the median, toward the middle. When offense or defense predominates, they put in rules changes or equipment changes or juice the ball or whatever to balance it back toward the center. It's a natural tendency of the game on the field and the way the people run it. So I think, I'm convinced that all these changes that are being proposed are aimed at getting baseball back towards some kind of a middle, at kind of chiseling away at these extremes. If batters can only adapt this uppercut home run swing because pitchers are coming in so fast they have no time to react in another way, well, maybe giving them an extra 2 feet to see the ball will encourage different kinds of hitting. We don't know. But I think I'm less afraid of these changes than I used to be, because I realize that in the time left to me, I'd better just enjoy what I can. You can only crusade for so many things. And I've had almost a 50-year crusade against the DH, for instance. And, I'm ready to concede that might be a losing battle. My big objection to the DH, by the way, is not in the major leagues. Professionals, are capable of doing all kinds of things. What bothers me is seeing that it exists in Little League and junior varsity and high school ball and all these other levels where kids should be encouraged to explore every area of baseball, every aspect of the game. And telling a 12-year-old that, you can pitch today, but you can't hit. Or tell another 12-year-old, you can hit, but you can't play the field. That, I think, is the prelude to this over-specialization that is limiting the talents further along. That's my real objection to it.
Well, on an amateur level, my objection is that it's too serious, too quick. That kids should just have the opportunity to get out and play choose-up baseball in front of nobody with their parents not involved and get good at it and have fun with it, and then see if you want to get serious. But don't something where he's got a big league uniform on and he's never even thrown a baseball, that type of thing.
Right.
Travel teams and breeding the kid just for the sport. And maybe it's just living one's life through your kids, which is never,
never a real good thing.
No. Did your parents encourage you to be a writer?
Interesting. I was so involved as a kid. I was very involved in sports of all kinds, and I was going to be a scientist, and I did very little reading. I read some, but it wasn't, oh boy, just let me go off here and read. And my parents told me that was a big sign of concern for them, that I wasn't interested in reading and I didn't write. And they just said, well, when he does discover it, he's just going to go so gung-ho for it that it'll make up for not getting to it sooner. I had a good friend whose parents forced him to spend a half hour doing nothing but reading. And my parents were right, I think. When I finally did discover it in college, I just, became a voracious reader. And I hadn't written anything to speak of in high school, but my freshman year I started writing, and professors encouraged me. And, then my parents' love of words finally manifested itself. So once I became a writer, they were extremely encouraging. My father was very critical of my writing. While he was alive, I wrote 3 bad novels. He actually read them. The only one that was decent was the one based on Victory Faust, interestingly. It's sad for me that he never got to read my book on Faust, because he really would have loved that one. So that's the answer. They absolutely encouraged me when it came around, but they did not. They let me find reading and writing in my own time and way.
No pressure put on you, in other words.
Right. My parents raised me with this philosophy. We don't care what you do. As long as you love doing it, put everything you have into it and do it as well as you can.
Nice.
Yeah,
really?
Absolutely.
Non-judgmental.
Nope.
No expectations that you feel guilty about not fulfilling. Some parents, oh, well, if he only could have been this, that. Really good.
It was, I think, a pretty noteworthy attitude coming from their generation, which, had gone through a lot, and in the conformist times that I was brought up in the 50s and 60s, Jewish kid back then, parents wanted you to be a professional, a lawyer or a doctor or maybe an accountant or, and none of that from my parents.
Security was on their minds more than anything else.
Yeah, well, I mean, in my way, I headed toward that path. I went to graduate school and taught for 3 years at a college, and then gave that up. But a professorship would have been, a perfectly conformist profession. That wasn't for me either.
Right. Hey, Gabriel, read me one more story. Read us one more story, and
do you have one in mind?
Yeah, I have one that you have in mind. How about that?
All right, let me go back to London and Laurence Olivier. My mother had 2 great crushes in her life. First, Laurence Olivier, chiefly after watching him in Wuthering Heights. And then later on, Paul Newman. Now, so she was enamored of Laurence Olivier. Saw him play Romeo on Broadway in the early 40s, of all things. My aunt, my mother's sister, this could be the subject of another show. My Aunt Eve was a very prominent milliner in Manhattan. She had a hat shop on Madison Avenue from the early 30s to the late 50s. And she was the first American fashion designer to do a show in Paris after World War II. She did a show of her hats in Paris. And before that, she went to London, did some publicity there, and her contacts there put her in touch with contacts in Paris, so that during her time in Paris, she was wined and dined. And one of the people who wined and dined her was Laurence Olivier, whom she had met somewhere in England before this trip, and he was going to be there. And my aunt earned the permanent jealousy of my mother because she and Laurence Olivier sat up all night drinking champagne in Paris. Yeah. I've read her account of it in the diary. They just talked, apparently, but they were both people of the world. My aunt later became a very well-known artist in Carmel in California, not far from you. We'll talk about that some other time. So it was an enormously big deal for me 25 years after my aunt made my mother jealous, for me to make my mother jealous by seeing him perform twice. And they're very memorable performances. The first one I saw was The Merchant of Venice, in which he played Shylock. And, of course, that famous speech, just such a riveting speech. But here's what he did. He actually stole a scene from offstage. The scene at the end when he's put on trial and banished, and that very emotional scene, they lead him off. And as they lead him off stage and into the wings, he starts this mournful wail, this existential, look what's happened to me thing, which he continued for it seemed like 15, 20, 30 seconds, off getting more and more, louder, and everybody stands on stage and the whole theater froze. Okay, is Larry done yet? He was known as a scene stealer, but I think he famously outdid himself on that one, stealing a scene for 20 seconds from off stage. Yeah,
that has to be a record. That's great.
Isn't that great? Now, Long Day's Journey to Night was a very special event. A famous Eugene O'Neill play, published posthumously because it was too painful for him to see it performed in his lifetime. It's an autobiographical play about O'Neill's childhood. His father, James O'Neill, was a famous actor who's literally spent decades performing nothing but his famous role as the Count of Monte Cristo, to the point where he ruined himself as an actor, became a caricature of himself, a heavy drinker, and, just a man who had chosen to typecast himself in one role for his whole life. And O'Neill's mother was a morphine opium addict, and he himself was tubercular. And so it's a gut-wrenching play about the weekend or the occasion when they find out that he has TB, and his mother uses that as an excuse to go off on a drug-induced hallucinatory binge. The play is almost 4 hours long. It's gut-wrenching from start to finish. And Olivier was about 60 or so. And he was just famously coming out of a horrifying episode in his life when he was almost paralyzed. It was nerves and stress. And they thought he had multiple sclerosis, all kinds of, they didn't know what was wrong with ALS. And he was just coming out of this, and he took on this incredibly grueling role. And somebody's at my door, so excuse me a second. And I got...
You go answer the door, and I'll tell the folks that it's Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph,
okay.
Zig Zag Man, talking to Gabriel Schechter, and I get to do this periodically. He is the most fascinating guy ever. He wrote at the Hall of Fame itself. He was a researcher.
So let me finish. I'm back.
Okay. How long were you up at the Hall of Fame?
I worked there for not quite 8 years, from 2002 to 2010.
Okay, and a quick question. You now live in Oregon.
Yeah.
What do you miss most about living in Cooperstown? And what do you like most about living in Oregon?
Very good questions, easily answered. I miss my friends. I miss my friends at the hall and all the other people who made my time there so great. What I don't miss and why I'm not there is the freaking winter climate.
Oh, yeah.
I had enough of it, and so I wanted something more temperate and less extreme. And so I went back to Oregon, a place I fell in love with a long time ago. So here I am.
What do you like most about Oregon?
The people. It's unique to me. The people, their default mentality seems to be live and let live. We got it pretty nice here. What can I do for you? And so the state has incredible natural beauty. I love, that's the first thing I fell in love with. But the people are great.
Finish your story, my friend.
Yes, I'm almost to the end of the story. So Olivier did Long Day's Journey Tonight, and I attended the second performance and sat in the front row. And, actors on stage spit a lot. He almost spit on me a couple of times. But to see him at close range, to see every gesture and facial tick and the tremors in his voice, he was famous for doing one amazing piece of physical business, hanging from his heels from a balcony. He loved it, and he did this one. He went to change a light bulb. He climbed up on the dining room table to change this light bulb and lost his balance, and went careening over backward and did about 10 backward steps and ground to a halt right at the front of the stage, like 4 feet in front of me. I thought he was coming in my lap.
Wow.
Yes. So that was my evening with Olivier.
Was there anything that your aunt discussed with him that we may not know about him, or that she shared with you, or just?
No, I never talked to her about it, unfortunately, and I don't recall anything astonishing in the account that I read of it. But I might find something and let you know. Just that he was charming, but my mother knew that much.
Now, was this her older sister or her younger sister? Just curious.
Older sister.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. So younger sisters can be jealous sometimes, and.
Oh yeah. Of Olivier? Oh sure.
Oh yeah. Hey, Gabriel, great show. I'm really appreciative.
It's been a blast, Ralph. I love it.
I'm glad you're enjoying it. You're a regular, one of the regulars on the Comfortably Zone Radio Network. I will have to, because George Case on Sunday mornings is going one-on-one with people. And
nice.
Interviews, and I'm going to put you on the list so you can be interviewed by George Case.
And Claire Hall, too. We want to do another one.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Yep.
We have a hell of a network going on, and I really want
think
to
so.
thank you for being a part of it. I'm blessed to do what I do, and thank you for doing it with me.
It's a pleasure, Ralph.
All right, and thank you, everybody, for listening. I'll be back yakking at you before you know it. Adios. The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.